Now I want to switch to a completely different topic, and this issue I highlighted at the top of the program, and that is companies underpaying their employees. Now, we all think we ought to get paid what we are due. No excuses for that. But when the ABC and even some of these labour-linked, union-linked law firms are underpaying people, then it's pretty safe to assume a lot of this is happening, if not all of it, accidentally. So what's going wrong here? I'm joined from Melbourne by Alan Moran, who's a contributor to The Australian, and he's an economist with regulation economics. I often speak to him about energy matters. Alan, thanks for joining us. Look, there's been a lot of talk around this. It's been described often as wage theft, but surely this more often is some sort of confusion or mistake.
Quite so. I think that there's several points one can make about the whole wage determination process in Australia. It is far more complex than in other countries. We have, 120 different awards in this industry, which means thousands and thousands of different permutations. Basically, a lot of firms have software packages which prevents them actually underpaying people, but it's obviously difficult to actually manage in certain cases. And it's associated also with the very high minimum wages we have. We have the highest minimum wages in the world generally. So these two factors, essentially a court of law deciding what the wages are to be paid, and these are enforceable at law, is very unusual worldwide and has created these problems. In a lot of ways, I mean, it's a delicious irony in some of these firms, as you've delightedly pointed out there, the ABC and people, the virtue signalers of this world being caught up in it. But basically, it is inadvertent in most cases because it's just too difficult to administer. The people who are administering wages aren't buccaneering capitalists trying to steal the bread out of some young person's mouth. These are just professionals within the industry, and it's all very well, I think, for Christian Porter to come and say, well, they ought to get their own act into gear in this respect. But basically, the difficulties are created in most respects by the complexity of the regulatory environment which firms must operate in, and they're going to run foul of them.
Yeah, well, I think what you're saying is right. I mean, and that's why calling this wage theft is, a bridge of rhetoric too far, I would have thought. But where I have a lot of agreement with Christian Porter, especially with these bigger firms, is no matter how complicated it is, if you're Woolworths or Coles or Bunnings, I mean, these organisations have big human resources departments. They have a lot of people employed in this area, and most of it, of course, is computerised. They ought to be able to get it right.
Well, you would think so, but, the fact is that it's not just the odd one that doesn't get it right. There's a whole lot of them don't get it right. So you've got to actually look on the other side and say, well, why have we made this so complex?
Yeah.
This doesn't happen in other countries. You don't hear about wage theft of this sort of nature in other countries, and that's because other countries don't have this very formalised system, almost a Soviet system, by which wages are determined by an external body, a court of law essentially, which says you've got to pay these wages and with this degree of complexity, and you've got to pay this, otherwise you're in strife. There is another aspect.
Yeah, go on, Alan.
There is another aspect of it insofar as the wages as paid. One finds a lot of firms who are paying lower wages than they may need to, but that's because people are attracted to them. If you've got to go into the advertising industry in the United States, you go to Madison Avenue because that's where the best firms are, and you actually get paid less. And you do so because basically you think you're going to get a good training, you probably do, and it will pay off in future years. So there is some inflexibilities created by the requirement that we should pay a particular wage rate, but by not allowing those firms or people to take advantage of getting training.
That's a slightly different argument about wage levels and whatever.
Sure.
But let's talk about this underpayment and access. The other side, to me, of this complicated system we have is that if employees, it's not just the employers getting it wrong, but as a worker, it's difficult to know exactly what you're entitled to, so therefore people aren't arcing up about their pay slips.
Well, again, this comes back to the system, and indeed in a lot of these areas you are talking about hard-up employees who are very conscious of what they can be paid and what is being offered in alternative employment. So they're pretty vigilant themselves in making sure they get paid the right amount of money and are pretty quick to go back to the employer if they think they're not. And it really does come back to saying, we have established such a fantastically complex system that nobody knows what the rate should be at any one time. It's time to actually change that system. It's not just the ABC, but it's, as you say, Bunnings and Coles and Woolworths, who've got massive PR system, employee systems involved, and they still can't get it right. It is time to actually say, well, you know, have we got a system which is so complex that nobody can get it right except at colossal cost?
Yeah, well, let's just have a look at one very prominent case involving a very famous restaurateur and TV figure. Have a look.
Celebrity chef George Calombaris has been slapped with a fine for shortchanging restaurant staff almost $8 million. The MasterChef star has apologised, promising to be an agent for change, but some former workers say they're still owed thousands.
Yeah, that's the George Calombaris case there, Alan. You're in Melbourne. You know how big this is. This is just about destroying his business and his reputation because of what's gone on here. And when you look at what's happened at all these other major firms, then surely he's in the same situation here. So surely this is being caught up in a complicated system rather than someone trying to rip off their staff.
I think that's absolutely correct. There's no question of the fact that Calombaris himself would have been setting those wage rates. He was, you know, he was the icon who led the restaurant chain, or the various chains of restaurants. He had managers in there who had access to the same sort of software that everybody else in the hospitality system has got, to actually try to prevent people flicking over into higher ward areas by making sure they have the right amount of rest and they don't work too many consecutive days. You know, but it's proved very difficult for him, and it's undone his business and wrecked his business, and you know, 400 people or whatever are out of work there as a result of that. You know, it comes back to saying, you know, that we have created a very difficult industrial relations system and payment system, which so many people are falling foul of, and it's not only the mainstream places like Coles and Woolies, but it's the virtue signalers, if you like the ABC and others. And I really think that Christian Porter basically, instead of making political capital, he ought to be thinking, how do we simplify this system so it doesn't happen again? Because hardly anybody thinks that this is done on purpose. It's inadvertent.
Thanks for joining us, Alan.
You're welcome.
Alan Moran there. This is a very difficult issue. Now, I think that, of course, Christian Porter's got to put pressure on the big companies because they've got all the money and all the resources to get this right. But he's also got to make the system simpler. We need simpler wages systems, because it's pretty obvious that Maurice Blackburn, the Labor Party union-linked law firm, is not going to be out there deliberately ripping off workers. The same goes for the Australian Broadcasting Corporation, that after all isn't even spending its own money. These people are not out there screwing over workers, and it seems that neither was George Calombaris and his outfit. And this immense complexity and it being dressed up as wage theft in his case, for instance, in the Calombaris case, instead of a few people getting some back pay of what they're owed, sends them out of work, hundreds of people out of work. That's nuts, and it's got to be fixed. And the way to fix it is to have an open, transparent, simple wages system.